Hello, welcome to another episode of TMC. I'm your host, Niall Ashley. As you know, I'm a Mainframe Society ambassador, and I'm also an IBM champion, and I also work as a RACF administrator and assessor, doing security work for Vitali Limited. Now, today we are joined by Joe Winchester in this beautiful historical building, which is at IBM Hursley, and this is the Wedgwood Room, so named for its beautiful colour. I believe, anyway. That's a possibly incorrect fact. But what isn't an incorrect fact is that ZOS is dope, as Joe's shirt displays proudly. So, Joe, tell us a bit about yourself. Tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Well, you used the word beautiful a lot in that sentence, but you didn't say I'm joined by the beautiful Joe Winchester, so I'm just going to...
It's unintentional, obviously.
Unintentional. Anyway, goodness gracious. My day job, who I am. Okay, so my name is Joe Winchester, and I work for IBM. Mm-hmm. International Business Machines, for folks who don't know what the acronym means. And my day job is probably, I tend to make it up as I come into work every morning.
I hope your managers aren't listening.
Yeah, no, they probably are. But I think I'm an IBMer who joined IBM when I used to work for a customer at the time. And I've done all sorts of things, including having my own businesses and stuff. And back in the sort of I suppose the 1980s and 90s and things before I joined IBM, I spent most of my time yelling at IBM because I thought that they weren't doing the right thing. They weren't actually doing things to service the needs of their customers. And they were also a sort of kind of waning company, if I can say that. Yeah. So at the time, because, they were king of the hill. They were the sort of apex predator of IT back at the time, and they're no longer anymore. So I think for various personal reasons, and also because a friend of mine who's now left IBM, but he was a director at the time, he actually phoned me up and he said, we're tired of you telling us what to do. Do you actually want to come and step inside the kitchen and actually, grab a pepper grinder and basically pick up a wooden spoon and actually start making what you think people want to eat? I thought, yeah, that'd be a good idea. Maybe I could just join there for a year and just, get kind of stable salary and things like that. And
how many years ago was that?
I've been here, I think it's like 27 or something silly like that. Yeah, I've been here.
And how much have you used the pepper grinder and the spoon?
So I think the energy and the mindset I tried to bring to IBM is, yes, I do always try and look at every problem through the lens of a customer. It's a long time since I was one, but obviously, because now I'm, part of the kitchen and I'm no longer sort of part of the sort of customer base. But the idea that you can, when you're solving every problem, you think, well, if I was a customer, my grandmother, bless her, and other people have said this before, is if you're not quite sure what to do in any situation, do as you would be done by. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty good sort of kind of life motto. Empathize with the person that you're just about to do something for, think how that would affect them. And that generally is going to be a good kind of radar as to what your next decision should be, which might be to just do nothing and walk away from that situation because you're going to do something that's toxic or you can do something offensive. And if you do that, I don't always get it right in life, you're probably going to come up. And that drew me very much towards open source software. My first sort of dabble with open source was, yonks ago now, when IBM sort of kind of got involved with Java, open source language, still very successful. Language, and IBM still heavily involved with that. And I was doing a bunch of flashy user interface stuff, GUI stuff. Because a lot of my background before IBM was actually doing things for sort of gaming software, and I was very much into this kind of like cerebral idea that if you see a picture speaks 1,000 words, a movie speaks 1,000 pictures. So I like the idea that things move and you interact with things in a very sort of natural, cerebral way, which is basically gaming software. Has got better. And if you look at gaming software, ever since it first evolved from kind of like, Pong or sort of Asteroids or something, still great games to play. As they get better and better, they're just more natural to play and the look and feel is more natural, and if you look at, a phenomenal movie that's paused or something. Anyway, now people do blurring and they put like, lensing and light effects. And it's more, and that's because as computers have got better and better, more powerful, and Moore's Law made them sort of just, faster and cheaper. As an engineer, you can do things that are more cerebral. My background is not an IT background. It's actually, we don't want to nerd out on this too much, but I did sort of a master's degree in genetics. Mm-hmm. So I'm very into the stuff life sciences, and I've biochemistry and things like that, and especially human biology. And so if you look at IT for me, so open source is very much fits right into my groove because it's about communities of people doing interesting things to solve interesting problems with no, I mean, obviously you've got people who, pay those, who want to have some little bit of influence in what the outcome is, but generally you're not beholden to, somebody who says, thou shalt do this because that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
You're constantly reassessing and you're constantly readjusting. So yeah, I got involved with Java. I forgot what the question is. I'm just rambling now, freestyling. I hope that's all right.
Well, actually, that's a good point because you just touched on community, and that actually was about to be my kind of opening question. Really, is that what does community mean to you?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So I think community for me, I'm not sure the derivation of the word community, but it's it's got lots of things in relation to sort of communal, a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a group of people, isn't it? So I live in a community. I'm part of various communities. I'm part of various tribes. I think community is all about egalitarian. Democracy is a very good form of government, which is where being part of a community means that you can influence, the laws, the bylaws, how that group of people interact together.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a community of people, you generally find that, if you don't have a community that answers to that, the loudest voice wins, the squeaky wheel, the extrovert, the person with the most money, the person with the sort of flashiest ego will win. And I think that that's always a bad outcome for just humanity or anywhere that occurs. It can be a good outcome if that based upon that individual, but you're rolling the dice.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful, I think it was Plato.
Benevolent dictator sort of thing.
Benevolent dictator, but I think it was Plato who first did it, which is, for them that seek power, it should not be granted. And I think William Shakespeare covers this quite well in King Lear. So for me, community is just about the outcome being for the benefit of the community. And the community is also part of that decision-making process and ultimately part of that production process. So I suppose that's what the word community means for me. And I'm involved in a number of communities. So I love open source software because it really plays to kind of my, my jam, really, which is all about getting things done collectively with a group of people for the best outcome of not necessarily that group of people, but always with a lens on who those people represent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can spend an awful lot of time getting that right. It's really important when you get it right. And it doesn't matter if what that community delivers is nothing, because you might all stand around. So
sometimes it's not about the destination so much as it's about the journey, right? It's about who's chipped in and how they've chipped in, rather than maybe necessarily the end product, because you'll all learn things along the way, right?
It's always the journey.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a journey. We have a finite time on this planet, and when we all look back and we're sort of drawing our last breath, you've got to think, what did we leave behind? Mm-hmm. And what you've always left behind is your legacy in terms of a community of people that ultimately you've done something for, or guided, or led, or managed to stop them from doing something. That's something that as I've grown older and wiser, because that sounds like a line from an Alan Parsons song, there is huge value in sometimes saying, our decision is to just do nothing and leave everything alone, because it's actually pretty good. We don't need to touch it because it's taken an awfully long time for people to figure that. There's a wonderful thing called Chesterton's fence, and Chesterton's fence is it's a sort of metaphorical analogy about a fence in the middle of a field that's there for no particular reason, and somebody comes along and removes the fence. What they don't realize is, once every so often a particular flood happens, there's a particular migration of frogs, whatever. This fence was doing something and you removed it, and now chaos and plague occurs on your village, right? Because you didn't know why the fence was there.
Yeah.
You thought it was a stupid idea. So sometimes it's very important, I think, with communities to say to people, if you want to remove something that your predecessors have put in place, prove to me that you know why they put it in place before you removed it, because you're just not quite sure. It's very sort of chaos theory of what the outcome it says is.
I think that's a really good point. Actually, there needs to be some sort of accountability with, especially in open source kind of communities, with like who is doing what and why. It's all in good saying like we're going to remove this, but like you say, is that actually the right thing to do? Is that going to cause a whole kind of worms, open Pandora's box?
It is, yeah. And from software communities, I mean, there was a thing a while back called XP Extreme Programming, and it was kind of like Will Cunningham and Kent Beck were these two kind of heroes of mine who kind of led that a lot. And it was very much about giving power. And they ended up basically, software developers, after a while, think, well, why don't we just write the test for our software before we build our software, like test-driven design? And that's a wonderful thing that's happened in software. It seems to have gone out of vogue a little bit recently, and I don't quite know why. But I'd like to sort of resurrect that. I just think communities make the right decision, and they stop polarization, and they stop sort of flame wars and, bun fights and, trolls and all of the sort of bad things that, humanity doesn't benefit from.
Yeah. So, Joe, I guess the next question I would like to ask then is kind of extending on this idea of, sort of accountability and trolls, and like you say, with the community, sort of, there needs to be someone who's sort of keeping things in check, but also making sure that everyone is kind of contributing kind of equally, like everyone's pulling their own weight, everyone's, supporting one another. I think it's a really important kind of question to ask, what community groups have you historically been a part of, and are you currently a part of?
So that's a really good question. So in the context of software and IT, or just in general?
Just, the ones that I guess you think are most relevant to this podcast.
The ones that are most relevant to this podcast. We completely lost track of where this podcast is going. But I suppose from a software point of view, the first community I think I was part of, the first formal community I'm part of, I suppose it was the gamer community. And it was very early on in the sort of 1990s. And I enjoyed gaming. Period, right? Most people who work in IT do enjoy gaming, right? Because we're basically kind of, cerebral nerds who enjoy that.
Yeah.
And I was able to very easily step from the side of being a consumer of game software to being a creator of game software. And that's something that this is. And my grandfather, bless him, gosh, I've talked to my grandmother, and that's something with my grandfather. He bought me and my two brothers a Sinclair ZX81 back in 1981. It was an expensive machine. So we had to all share it as a Christmas present. My two brothers wanted to play games. All I wanted to do was work out how they'd been written, to decompose them, to basically cheat. So I didn't die, or I could get to the next level without having to solve the previous one, or I had infinite lives or whatever. And then eventually to start, modifying the graphics on the screen and playing around with them. And then, but basically futzing with the games. And then eventually reverse engineering them, eventually writing software to help people pirate the games. And various things, and then got into writing for magazines about how to publish those and lots of things. So I think the gaming community, and what really actually encourages me is a lot of people still in IT who are still very much part of that community. And I think
there's a lot of piracy too. People who are supporting the open source gaming community, if you want to refer to it that way.
There is. But at work, the first sort of formal open source community I worked with was a Java community process, or the JCP. And I was very fortunate. I was IBM made me its representative on a Java bean specification. We're going way back when, into the sort of early noughties, about Java beans, because I was working on a GUI builder for Visual Aids for Java and then for Eclipse. And that was a lot of fun. So I find myself in a room. So I'd be sent by various sort of IBM directors, and I would, I'd be told this particular rival company, they're just evil, they're just orcs, they're going to come, they're going to eat your babies, because from a sort of sales point of view, they probably were, because they interacted with them at that level. But when I actually went into a room and met these people from these rival companies, we're just like, we're all just doing the same stuff. Let's actually not reinvent the wheel. And also let's actually make it so that when we go back to our paymasters, we can say, this problem that all of these different companies at the time, so I don't want us to get sued by people, but Borland were one, Sun Microsystems were another. None of those two exist anymore, so hopefully they won't sue us. Then and IBM were obviously there, and we were all like, well, we're all building the same thing, right? So from a sales point of view, our salespeople are competing to sell these products, but it's a waste of our development dollars if we all independently build the same solution, and also if we build things that don't interoperate. So if you think about Java, a kind of GUI builder, somebody releases a third-party product that says, you know what, you can drag and drop a spreadsheet icon, you can drag and drop, a map icon of the world and click it and configure it and then build a graphical user interface. Isn't it really cool if that third-party vendor market can build plugins that interoperate with everything?
Yeah.
Right, and that's basically the problem we're trying to solve. And I was part of solving that problem. And I'm quite proud of that.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot, interoperability between apps. And interestingly, all of the engineers from Sun Microsystems then got hired by Google, and they were friends of mine who worked for Google and then created Android OS, which is great. So you can see sometimes with these incredibly successful products, the beginnings of those happen in just small rooms between basically smart people saying, let's just do this stuff. Let's just be like, our parents were hippies in the 1960s, and they all sort of danced to Janis Joplin and Beatles albums, and, sort of made love in fields and things like that. And with their progeny, let's do the same, but let's do the same with software.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And that's sort of naturally evolved into Open Mainframe Project?
It did, yeah. There's a few skips. So I was bringing this back down to Mainframe. I worked in the Eclipse community. I worked in various other open source. Yeah, Open Mainframe Project is really interesting. So I love it
because you're for reference to our audience, this is something that you kind of do so much so that you're supporting it, including at events like GS UK, Share, etc.
You're right. Goodness, thank you for it's called stovepiping, by the way, where somebody interviewing somebody just like feeds them the answers to the questions.
I have no idea what you're on about.
Yeah, it is. It's called stovepiping. Yeah, Google for it. Yeah. By the way, it's safe to Google for that at work. So it's a technique that Niall just did called stovepiping, which is where you feed the person you're interviewing the answer that you want. Right. So
I had no such thing.
But what used to be part of GSE UK, I was very proud of being part of that organisation. I'm now part of GS UK. We've just finished our first virtual conference. We have an in-person conference. So I'm very much involved with helping to organise that and sort of being part of the selection process. And I presented to that. That's something I'm very, very proud of. I'm part of the what other communities we work? Open Mainframe Project. Yeah, that's part of the Zowe community. That's another perfect example, coming back to that Java, which is where I work with colleagues and friends as well from companies like Broadcom, Rocket Software, Phoenix Software International, and others that we compete with from a sales point of view. But we also collaborate to solve common problems and to create messaging. IBA Group is another one that we work with there. So yeah, that's something that I'm very, very proud of. Outside of work, I do all sorts of other weird stuff with various communities.
Yes, including you do guide running, don't you?
I do guide running.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I like to run.
Yeah.
I like to run and just stay fit. And I don't like to sit down. I just literally, like, if I'm watching something that's a long film or something, I mean, unless it's really captivating me, I'd much rather just go on a run or go on a bike ride or just do something. I just keep moving. I just burn a heart. So I've always been interested in running, which is wonderful for physical health, and it's also wonderful for mental health.
Yeah.
So I belong to a running club. Interesting, it's called Winchester Fit Club, because my last name is Winchester, and we're actually quite close to Winchester, and I live in Hurston, close to Winchester. Yeah. It's quite good, yeah. So I have a running club. This is a bit like you going out saying Ashley Fit Club.
I don't think there's interesting.
No.
I'll have to find out.
But and it's a very inclusive running club because we celebrate everything, right? So somebody can get a personal best, like I'm running a 5K tomorrow, for example. A really good 5K time is like sub 20 minutes if you're running it in a sort of park or something like that. And there are people who can do that. But we celebrate if somebody runs and says, well, I got under 45 minutes today, they will get the same, reward and number of emojis on the sort of social media as somebody who says, you know what, I just busted 17 minutes, because they're both wonderful accomplishments. You're only really racing against yourself.
Yeah.
And as part of that, that introduced me to being a VI guide. So I guide visually impaired runners, which is basically somebody who is, unable to, see as they see things in a different way. They can be 100% blind. They can have a visual impairment, or they can have something that's basically going to spook them when they're running. And then I will basically go around and run at their pace. In some cases, I'm tethered to them 100% of the time. I'm giving entirely verbal instructions, and they are just basically blind to everything that everybody else is seeing. Yet we're running with 500 people around the park, right, with trees and just trip hazards everywhere, and just dogs and buggies and bushes and brambles and overhanging spark and stuff like that, and diesel cars being started and buses and things like that. So that's something that I enjoy. I guide people for that. Yeah, that's something that I enjoy a lot. Interestingly, as I get older, I slow down, obviously. I don't have the same body that I did when I was 18 years old, when I got my personal bests at running, but my enjoyment level has increased, being part of that inclusive club. Yeah.
And actually that's a really important point, because inclusivity is something, and kind of cultural accessibility is something that we're both, very kind of big advocates for us, and we're both very passionate about. So, as that's a sort of, a kind of prevalent topic to both of us, we're something that, say, we're both, very driven to, an aspiration about doing support. Is there any reason in particular that this is so close to your heart? Is there any historical reason that maybe you're so kind of, driven to support inclusive practices and cultural accessibility?
Wow, that's an interesting question for you to ask me. What you just asked me, is there a reason why I'm driven towards accessibility? There is. If I go too deep into that reason, I'm probably going to cry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I know you said you want to see me cry in this podcast. You might not
want to see you cry.
You might want to see me cry. Yeah, I do. I do have a lot of emotional things based upon. My younger brother, my kid brother now, is going through multiple sclerosis. He has, which is a degenerative, non-recoverable illness, where your nervous system attacks you. So he was always faster than me and a much better cyclist than me. And he can't run anymore. He can't even walk anymore for particular distances without having to rest his leg. He's just got an electric bicycle. So I recently went out with him for an electric bike because of issues and things like that. So I'm very much aware of the challenges from a mental health point of view. I've seen people take their own lives. I've seen people manic depressives had to be sectioned, very, very people very close to me in my life and things like that. From a personal point of view, so I have a pacemaker implant which keeps me alive, so I've actually died. I've actually had my heartbeat stop for a period of time that would have killed most people if they hadn't been in such good cardiovascular shape as myself. I had to be recovered in a hospital and things like that. So I think that every day is a bonus, really. And you want to sort of leave your mark by saying, what can you do? And when we talk about inclusivity, so I always think from a scientific point of view, I don't want to follow something blindly in terms of faith, but I always question, what is the evidence behind this? If you go to the countries that I most like to visit, and I think have the best standard of living and the quality of life, are probably the Nordic countries. And I think the United Nations did a poll as well. The countries that have the most representation of women in government are the most successful countries, right? And I'm not saying that men don't have a place in government, but
historically always have done.
But they obviously historically always have done. We're obviously, as white men, we're obviously, sort of top of the kind of like totem pole when it comes to white privilege. Yeah. So it's quite from a clearly empirical, when you look at everything about suicide rate, about cradle to grave healthcare and things like that, disparity of wealth, crime, suicide rate, everything at all, countries and societies and communities where there is more representation, so that in terms everybody, the diversity that you get at birth, right, should go all the way up through into the offices that make decisions, that pass judgments on who should go to jail and who should be pardoned and who should be paroled and who should be given a second chance, or who should be granted a place to a university or whatever. All of those things that give you privilege, or they knock you down the ladder in life. So from an empirical point of view, it's quite clear that the more diverse you have all the way through to that rainbow, the better things are.
Yeah.
And it worries me whenever I see a group where that isn't represented. So it doesn't matter where that group is, because and whenever I see that being wound back, I'll try and do everything I can. There's enough people who are quite happy to put their foot on the scales and wind that back.
Yeah.
So
always it turns into an echo chamber, really, doesn't it? Because you have people who, maybe if there isn't a class difference, there isn't a race difference, there isn't a gender, sex difference, etc., then you just hear the same opinions, basically, kind of on and on and on. And actually, sometimes it's healthy to challenge what we believe or challenge what we hear. I think that's...
It's absolutely healthy. And I mean, we were talking about this a little bit more. So one is diversity of vocabulary and diversity of inclusion, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier. I remember, so I'm 58 years old. I turn 60 next year, which is quite terrifying. And I'm in a particular jam, and I've forgotten who did it growing up. And they had the icon on their jam. I was just a little child at the time. Was basically
a caricature,
a horrendously offensive. And I'll say it now. You can edit it out. Basically, a gollywog caricature.
Yeah.
And I was just a child at school, and there were people there, being ridiculed, being called out in the school playground. I mean, and I look back and think, how dare? I was just a child at the time. I was going back to primary school. And I remember the backlash from people when whoever that company was, that jam company, obviously at some point in time they thought, this is really bad.
Yeah.
Let's just get rid of that. And people were like, let's clutch onto this. And it's obviously a historical relic. And I spent a lot of time I lived in the USA, and I see certain things there that go back through sort of, the treatment of people of color through the sort of perspective of slavery, or the perspective of Native Americans being treated so badly and things like that, and the way that Hispanics are treated and things like that. And and I think Britain is actually quite a good country. When I think about inclusivity and Metropolitan Police, so 1980s, there were some terrific riots in Brixton and London. I mean, I wasn't in the riots when it happened, but I lived quite close by. I mean, it was terrible. And I think they're precipitated by and things happen. And I had sort of Black Lives Matter in the US recently, but with this sort of George Floyd being murdered by Derek Chauvin. And what the Metropolitan Police did then at that point in time, they said, okay, we need to be like the people we represent. And there was a massive recruitment drive to get more women, to get more Asians, people of color, and then it took a long time before the first sort of, gay footballer came out, and it's outrageous that people can't just be themselves, and you sort of that representation all the way up.
Yeah.
So I always think that the outcome of that is always better in the long term.
Yeah.
And that's something that we should all strive for. Because and people always say sometimes people, my sort of idiot friends go, well, you're a white man. Why do you champion women so much? Why do you champion people of color? Why do you champion LGBTQ+? I'm like, because there's like 49 of you, shouting for white men. I am, I'm just going to step on scales on the other side to just try and tip it a little bit more, because the outcome for society and humanity
and I think
is always going to be better. And you can empirically prove that. You just can.
Yeah,
right?
Championing things is such an important, such an important thing to do. I mean, when I think about kind of what maybe inspired me for, the more inclusive practices, is that, my grandmother had a friend who was blind, and they used to go and they used to engage in activities together quite often. So they'd used to, they'd go to watch the theatre, they'd go to watch the, go to watch like musical performances, go to an orchestra, to a ballet. And it wasn't so much that, I don't know if she was, if I recall correctly, she was kind of completely blind, but she used to enjoy the kind of atmosphere. She used to enjoy, the music, and she could feel the vibrations, and, certain things can still be enjoyed. And I like the idea that, we can support people in enjoying things maybe differently, or enjoying them to the best of their ability. Talking about video games earlier, I don't like the idea of having games not have difficulty options, because I'm like, why should someone not be able to experience an art form simply because maybe they have slow reaction speeds? I just don't believe in that. I think that's not fair. And I think championing those sorts of people who may be underrepresented and maybe marginalised, I think that's a really noble thing to do.
Absolutely. I mean, well, yes, it's noble for the people. So one particular runner, a guy who's 100% blind, we can go to a run where there are 400 people there, and somebody will call him out by name, and he just goes, "Oh, hi Denise," hi Bob, or something. His sense of hearing is so acute. And there's one particular race I remember I was running with him, and he said to me, somebody's playing a tambourine. There was just so much noise around. There were dogs barking and everything was hollering. It was just a big noisy race. And I was like, okay. Literally half a mile later, we turned around a corner and there was a child hitting a tambourine. The acute sense of hearing that somebody who was 100% blind has. And at that point, and everybody I guide is blind, almost without exception. They're perfect pitch singers. And it makes me realize, well, okay, so maybe I can see in a visual spectrum that you can't, but you can clearly hear in a way that I can't. So from their perspective, I'm basically deaf, because there's so much more. And if we didn't bring those people into the invention process of whatever humanity or software is trying to do, we're going to have a worse outcome,
I mean, absolutely. Inclusive practice and kind of this kind of idea of cultural accessibility, it's proven to kind of improve industry kind of innovation and potentially yield higher kind of profit margins, etc. So from a business perspective,
and even the pronouns that people use. I remember I was chairing a panel recently. It was at a big Mainframe conference, and one particular individual, somebody asked a question, and they said, "Oh, when he downloads this piece of software, he will be doing he." And I thought, okay, that's three strikes. And I literally just interrupted them and I said, "You do mean he or she? We're talking about gender neutral sense, Jay." And the person looked at me. You wouldn't believe the backlash I had based upon that in the feedback forms. Look,
but
some of the most offensive things that people anonymously put about me. To which point I was like, okay, well, and I didn't deliberately. I didn't do it to troll anybody. I was like, so if somebody's thinking, well, I'm not he, I don't identify as he, I identify as she, which is kind of 50% of the population. Does that mean I'm not allowed to? I mean,
it's not relevant for me.
We just have to rethink
exactly
we just have to rethink what we're doing. It's not irrelevant for me. And you see this all the time. You look at, there's a great big thing kicking off at the moment about the BBC have it about women's sports. We should commentate on women's sports, and that's an interesting one. But if there's a finite set of people and I'm male and I'm there, I'll just step aside. I'll be like, just go for it. And Linux Foundation is really interesting. I love working with them. They have a massive. If you submit a panel for Linux Foundation, you must have people who identify as being part of a minority, whatever that is. You just can't. And every time, if I go out on LinkedIn and I see a group of all white men over 45 or over 50, which is kind of my demographic, I literally am like, swipe right, whatever, swipe left. I don't know. I'm not young enough to know which way is.
No, don't use Tinder.
But they're just not interested in what they have to say because I've heard it a squillion times before. Bless them.
I think it was really interesting. Me and my partner, we're from sort of obviously different genders, but also different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so actually there's a lot of times where I've realised, the amount of privilege that I've had growing up that she and her family haven't. And I always find myself, I have to listen harder. I have to challenge myself because I have these preconceived notions of maybe what life could be like for, people when it hasn't been like that. And these experiences that have shaped me are different than experiences that have shaped her. And although we have very similar perspectives now, and we align kind of politically and kind of culturally and emotionally and etc. I find myself constantly making sure I am listening to her kind of intently because her perspectives are so valid and they challenge a lot of my preconceived notions. I think that's brilliant, and I wish more people would do that. I wish more people would be willing to sit down and just listen.
Well, absolutely. I mean, little thing. We're going way off topic but if you go to. There's always queues outside female toilets, right? Because it obviously takes very long to get to the bathroom, so it does take to men. That's outrageous. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I went to the opera. I went to Peter Grimes' West National Opera just last night, maybe 2 nights ago. It's really good. I do love opera. It was outrageous. I mean, for Christ's sake, let's fix this.
But it's like it's the
what on earth is going on?
We still have gendered bathrooms, and we have we've sort of gone away from sort of blacks only and whites only, but obviously for good reason. We don't want these Jim Crow kind of segregations. But actually, my favourite experiences have been just going to a cocktail bar, and they've just got a row of cubicles, and they're not gendered. They're just anyone can use them. They're just anyone who needs to use a toilet can use it, and then you don't have these queuing issues because obviously people will just use the toilet as they need, and it doesn't matter which cubicle block they use. There's just a row of cubicles.
The diet, everything about diet. If you're celebrating Ramadan, why should you, and you go to a conference, why should the dinner be within daylight hours? Because, all of those things like that, we have to be very, very, very conscious about. If you're celebrating, we absolutely have to be much more conscious and much more aware of all of those. The outcome will always be better. Nobody can justify that unless you're justifying it from a point of view of bigotry or the fact that you want to occupy your elevated, privileged slot, right? And you wish to, and for whatever particular reason of ignorance, and I think of religious diversity and stuff. This is hugely, hugely important for us to be able to do. Having safe spaces as well that people can pray, or you're celebrating various sort of dietary restrictions and things like that.
So speaking of these cultural, these kind of cultural accessibilities and these kind of inclusive practices, in the Hersley block, they have a multi-faith prayer room, and I think that's it sort of builds on this multi-faith prayer room, which I think is brilliant. That to me is one of many examples of kind of good practices that kind of other companies, other organizations should adopt. But are there any others that you think maybe if anyone listening here has thought to themselves, how could I be a more inclusive manager or more inclusive organization?
So I can give my personal opinions. My opinions are mine, and not part of IBM. So you talked about Hersley, which is the IBM site we're at. So Hersley is a very inclusive site. So I think we're just finishing celebrating a sort of diversity inclusion, and I think I saw some posters recently about celebrating just be yourself at work. IBM Hersley has sort of LGBTQ plus sort of groups, it's a very safe space,
employee resource groups,
people to get to work together and deal with things. It has lots of it has first aiders who go around, so if you cut your finger, you can just literally just phone a number and somebody's going to come and give you a bandage and stuff. But it also has mental health groups and things for people to do. It has lots of really good activities to. Sometimes you don't just want the mental health ambulance, you want to think, well, let's look at the sort of longer picture, right? It's much better to sort of stop a problem. What is it? Smart people fix problems, wise people avoid them. Because of some
prevention's better than the cure.
Fortune cookie here, but lots of things about there's running events that happen. There's gaming communities where people just do board games. There's a friend of mine is part of a sort of crafting, like knitting community, and it's just. So all of those things just create for just a better outcome. I think that you have. I'm not a mental health expert, but I think that generally the more you can feel welcomed and people listen to you
comfortable
because they're comfortable, because you end up looking at people a bit like you and you think, well, I don't have to change shape, or I don't have to lose weight, or I don't have to cut my hair, or whatever. Coming from somebody who's completely bald, but whatever, that was a really bad analogy. But just be yourself, and once you're comfortable in being yourself, you can do that. So I think Hersley's got lots of different societies, and there's like exercise classes and dance classes and gym. There's a gym and stuff like that. And I think that's always, you're always going to get a better outcome if you do that. If you don't have to say to people that you've got to wear a blue suit, and you've got to be basically a sort of white male, and you have to be heterosexual, and you have to sort of do all of this stuff. So I do think that's a good thing that IBM does. It astonishes me that people think that that's kind of over and above what we should be doing.
I mean, the idea for me with kind of inclusive, diverse workforces is that we shouldn't, as I say, sort of touching on kind of Jim Crow, we shouldn't be having like this is the boys' club and this is the girls' club. This is the kind of the straights and the non-straights, or the etc. Like we should just be saying, look, anyone and everyone should be able to belong in this place, and everyone's got perspectives that are interesting and challenging.
There is,
and challenging in a healthy way. Like, actually, have we considered this? I look at sort of this idea that again, from my privileges, I might not realize what it's like for someone else, and like you say, for things like times that people eat, well, that we all just assume that we eat at the same time, but actually, what about people who are celebrating sort of fasting, and they're celebrating Ramadan? It's like, okay, that's something interesting that we need to kind of be inclusive and kind of mindful of.
China, people have festivals in China. They have the Lunar New Year. They have certain things that they do in China. There's certain ways. So my son is in Japan. One of my younger sons is in Japan at the moment. I'm fortunate to spend 17 days with him recently, just learning. And the way that you're polite, the way that you address people. I've been to India, and I was in India for a certain festival, and people eat with their left hand, and you kind of scoop food up and stuff like that. You don't eat with knives and forks. So just why do we have cafeterias where we just give people knives and forks? And I know people who say that they feel uncomfortable coming because they can't eat the way that they were taught to eat, because they think that somebody's going to look at them through some sort of superiority, snobbery lens. And I'm just like, that's, and until you've seen those and you're aware of those, or, men wearing skirts, men wearing, and they're not wearing trousers and things like that, or vice versa, women not feeling comfortable wearing trousers and having to wear skirts. All of that stuff is just all BS. It all belongs in the last century. It's outrageous. I find it phenomenal. Like Eddie Izzard is one of my favorite comedians, right? Because I remember You know,
He's an actor. They're an actor.
He's an actor as well. No, marathon runner. Talking about running,
a sort of jack of all trades, I guess.
He is, yeah. And I love his kind of comedy. And neurodiversity is a phenomenal one as well, because neurodiversity implies that there is some normal.
Yeah.
There is no.
But what is normal?
But everybody, but just celebrating diversity across all spectrums of it is something. And we should always be aware. And you're absolutely right. We are all subjective and biased. So the only way that we know the right thing to do for another community is to, coming back to my grandmother used to say to me, normally when she was annoyed at me, she goes, "You've got two ears and one mouth for a reason." It was a polite way of saying, listen more than you speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's a sort of great place to sort of lead on to the kind of the last question of this, if that's okay, Joe. So the last question, which we always ask, is what would you, as an individual, like to see more of in this community going forwards? And I know we've touched a lot on kind of accessibility and cultural kind of inclusivity, but you know that doesn't necessarily have to be the kind of sole focus of this answer. Maybe if you want to touch on something else, or you want to touch on something maybe adjacent, aligned to that.
What would I like to see more of in the community? Do you mean in the Mainframe community?
Yeah, so in the Mainframe community, maybe in the open source community, but basically, you know, we've touched a lot on sort of inclusive kind of practice.
Transparency.
Yeah. Okay.
So if I had to, if you asked me to say what's one word I'd like to see, is I would like to see transparency.
Mm-hmm.
The communities that work well, and I've done all sorts of things outside of what you asked me about. I was a parish councillor for years. I saw like local politics when it worked well, and I saw local politics when it didn't work well.
It got aggressive.
Right. And you know, there can be corruption at the level of literally somebody putting like a window without permission or something like that, or building a barn or something, you know, paying off a councillor. So whenever everything is transparent, then it's a kind of do as you would be done by. Then basically people doing the wrong thing or not doing something that they can justify externally, it's that kind of like, it's not so much shaming, but if you can't, it's a do as you would be done by, right? Or would your future self be proud if they came in a time machine and came back and asked you, why are you making this decision? So I just want to see more transparency. So I'm a huge fan of open source, not because once upon a time, when open source first came, it was like people were just like, where's the source code? You know, this is broken. How can I fix it? Yeah. We're like, we'll give you the source code in a zip file. Open source is a lot more than that. It's not kind of read only. It's the fact that the entire process, this kind of cradle to grave, the inception of an idea through to delivery of that idea is all transparent.
Yeah.
Who wrote it, who gets credit for it, who authored it, who committed it, who reviewed it, who wrote the test case. You know, so the open source kind of perfect standard for me is there is nothing done in secret. And I do that a lot of the time when people ask me questions, or somebody goes, well, who's doing this work, or who did something. I'll just be like, well, let's go and look at the commit logs. It's when was that agreed? Oh, let's go and look at the meeting. The meeting was recorded. By the way, we've got a transcript of it. It's all here. Anybody, how did I know it took place? Well, here's our calendar. You know, you can just go join that meeting. You know, how can I influence that thing? It's taking a while because the mainframe is the slowest. Mainframe, I mean, moves at a kind of, super tanker, like driving a snail's pace compared with distributed world. And that's the one reason why I'm in here, is because I feel I can affect a bigger change in terms of community, because the others are already sort of smarter and ahead and younger than me. But get more transparency in every piece of the process that occurs.
That's not just in open source, right? Because that could be an organization, and kind of the So, for example, that could be like, with these organizations that host events, that could be, like how do we kind of pick the best sessions, or even just pick any sessions, as a chairperson, there's got to be a transparent process. GSUK using Sessionize. And
great minds think alike. But literally at the point that you said that, you're absolutely right. So I know, you can see, I mean, various people on the internet, on the internet. I sound like my mother. It's the internet. The internet tells me. Okay, I'll pick an example. On LinkedIn, somebody might go, yeah, this person is, the most influential XYZ.
Yeah.
And the community's like, okay, how did you make that decision? Like, where is the transparency behind it? I'm not saying that they don't deserve it, but because somebody else might say, well, that's a bit unfair because I thought, so-and-so should have won it and they didn't, or something. So everything should be transparent. Elections are transparent. The second that it doesn't become transparent about who vote, you don't have to know who voted for who, but you have to trust that there is some independent body doing that. Otherwise you think, well, is it a pay-to-play system? are you tipping it this way or the other? What's going on? You have to have that transparency.
You risk a conflict of interest, even if it's maybe not there, but it's perceived to be there. And that transparency can actually it can actually cover your back, as well as, just obviously building trust with people, right? Because they'll trust that you're being honest, and then they don't have to worry, are you
trust with being honest. Exactly. I mean, so if you go and look at, so I love to cook. And whenever I'm buying something, I always go and look at where was it sourced? How many miles did it have to travel? Did it come from the EU? Did it come from the UK? Or was it stuck on a plane because it came from South America? And it's like, and because I can make my own decision based upon my preference towards, CO2, carbon emissions and the kind of like green footprint, non-organic. I can see the amount of MSG that they put in something, monosodium glutamate. I can see the amount of E numbers they put in. Did they put in? That's really useful to know. I mean, in certain supermarkets, you can see they actually tell you the farm that it came from, and I have favorite farms that things came from. So I'm vegetarian now, but and I love that level of transparency. And I, as a consumer, will make a choice to actually spend more money which means I get to eat less, but hopefully I get to eat less of the healthy food at those places like that. You're absolutely right. So there should be transparency behind who we celebrate and who we reward. And you also have to make sure, power corrupts. Power always corrupts. And you've always got to make sure that once people get into a position that when I was a parish councillor, I won an election. It wasn't very good. My neighbours voted for me. But I was beaten off after 4 years, and they had to re-vote for me. And eventually they weren't happy with me and I got voted off. I'm like, that's good. Yeah. People come to me and they go, I'm really sorry you got voted off. I voted for you. And I'm like, yeah, but the majority of the people in my village were just tired of me. Let's get somebody fresh in here.
And that's true of everything. GSUK, like I was in the 101 stream, but eventually, am I really the right person to do Waves 101 when I'm not that new to this? And actually, I think that's good. Handing that over and saying, do you know what? Now it's time for someone else and a fresh perspective.
Ask your customers. Yeah, the most important and the most successful companies are the ones that ask their customers. If you go and look from brands on, whether you get in an airline, right? Airlines don't build planes, right? Looking at you because you're like, yeah, I do know that you're mansplaining me here. I used to work for Airbus.
They look where I used to work.
Yeah, I used to work forever. Right. So airlines provide the service by which you can travel in a plane, right? So the plane is safe, period, right? So why do you go to one particular airline or another? You go because of the brand, because you trust them, because you trust they're going to land you and not poison you on the way and give you a nice check-in experience and not lose your bag and stuff like that. So airlines are really, really good, but they're massively driven for cost efficiency. And if they make one misstep, zoomya, they can just be like massively in the hole to their shareholders. So any brand that you choose is because you have a trust relationship, which presumably means that you trust the transparency by which they do things. And you can see it. And, good airlines have good, airline staff, right? Who welcome you onto a plane and just don't trash your bag or.
And that's it. Trust is a two-way street, right? If you trust me to be mature and make a reasonable decision, that empowers me. I feel more respect kind of given, and I'm more willing to give that respect.
Yeah,
back,
and the other
and
thing,
I trust you more as a result. It's just a two-way street. Yeah.
This sounds like the other thing of trust is the other thing is forgiveness. Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
I've made a squillion mistakes. And people do make mistakes. Just don't flame people. Don't troll people. Just let them off. Just trust people and kindness and empathy. Yeah. And the other one is I told you about, like, sometimes the best decision is no decision. Right. Really do. I often do see people just like driving forwards, just going up gears, burning hotter, working people harder, shipping software more frequently, adding in more bells and whistles and more right mouse click menu options. And sometimes no, you've found a good recipe. Just leave it alone. Just let it rest and leave it alone. The other thing from the community, from the Mainframe community, is I see this massive divide between people who grew up on green screens and ISPF and all of that stuff. And they're hanging on to, they associate the Mainframe brand with legacy technology, right? It's not their train set anymore, right? The generation coming up, and you're part of that as well. And there's other individuals. Emma Skovgaard is one who's phenomenal. Stephen Perver is another one as well. Gosh, I'll run out of names. But there are a lot of people coming up now who are having to fight against that kind of old guard, who are basically saying, wrestle this, JCL, till I die out of my, cold dead fingers, till I learn Python, or till I, actually, and I even come across sites who's saying, oh, I'm not trusting SSH, it's the devil's protocol, SNAR was better than TCP/IP or whatever. And it's basically just leave and retire, spend some more time with your children, right?
Yeah. And listen to
your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, because sometime you're going to look back and you're going to realize what an ass you were, and how you ended up being the reason that what you loved went down, because you weren't transparent, you didn't trust, you didn't empathize, and you were a bigot, and you still are, probably all 5 of those. I think that was maybe only 4. Yeah. Just kindness. We just need more kindness in the world. The whole vector of humanity, I think, this millennium has been that there's less kindness than there used to be.
Doesn't generate clicks.
I just sound like nostalgia isn't what it used to be, type thing. But certainly, I grew up in an era when I was being terrified of being sort of nuked by the Soviet Union, and a lot of. I remember celebrating the millennium. I remember standing on a beach in West Wales, holding my sort of 3-year-old son, just literally. Cry now, but just think of this is great, all that is left behind us.
Yeah,
we got through everything. We got through riots, and then this entire millennium, I just think we're winding back. It's just horrendous, and we just need more trust. We need more kindness. We need more empathy.
Yeah,
and
positive progress.
We do. And there's no speed limit on that.
No.
If anybody feels embarrassed by being ridiculously sort of kind, it doesn't matter, because if you're going at 100 miles an hour, there'll be 100 people going at 1 mile an hour in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And your job is to basically run as hard, as fast as you can in that direction to offset all of that negativity, because that negativity is just ballooning and snowballing all the time. The mainframe community is still a wonderful kind of space to be in, but there are a few individuals, occasionally I talk to them, and they're really technically beautiful and brilliant, kind individuals. And then occasionally we'll end up drifting into something that's sort of quasi-political. And I'll be like, whoa, dude, really? Take that armband off. I didn't realize that you were quite a sort of a nut job as you are.
Yeah.
Given that you're an engineer, apply that engineering and scientific sort of discipline to people and make decisions.
Wow, so you started with 1, and we a lot of things you'd like to see from the community going forward.
And one more thing.
Is there actually?
No, I jet.
Nah, okay. I think this is a great episode, and I think this is a really great place to kind of wrap it up. Ultimately, there is a lot that we can aspire towards from the Mainframe community, and we don't want to kind of say that in a way that we're asking too much of it, but that we want this to be the best it can be. We want this to be the most kind of accessible, inclusive, friendly, and diverse place it can be, for everyone and by everyone, and for the betterment of everyone. So I think that's fantastic. I appreciate your time, Joe, and I know you're not come far today. This is your home, as it were, your building.
I feel like Mr. Darcy. This is my home. Yeah,
But it's been an absolute pleasure, and really appreciate your time today. So thank you for coming on, and thank you to our audience for listening. And this has been the Mainframe Community podcast by the Mainframe Society.
Cheers. Thanks, Niall. Pleasure.